1969, the last passenger trains travelled the Waverley line.
Hawick station now presents a very dismal scene, and the once familiar railway sounds are no more than memories.
And the Central Borders area was then at least 40 miles from the nearest main railway station.
The way that the New Castleton community was integrated into the big world was largely through the railway system. There was very little mobility, and the railway was the big thing. So there were probably 6 or 8 trains a day passing through, and most of them would go all the way from Edinburgh through Carlisle and down to the south of England and back. On the train, there'd be 20 or 30 pupils going to Hawick High School, and then maybe 50 or 60 people working in the mills and in the factories in Hawick. And then other people had to get, a few would go to Carlisle. So the community then was integrated through the educational system and the train line with very little travel done by any other method. Then it was an essential travel part of the infrastructure that allowed people to go to work and so on. And there were no buses in those days, of course. But now it would act as a sort of cement or glue to make New Castleton and all the other smaller villages in between New Castleton and Hawick and New Castleton and Carlisle. It would open that up and make them much more integrated in the community. It would be much more efficient and much less expensive to run it than it was when Beeching decided it was uneconomic in the 1960s. So you'd have a more streamlined, more modern, more automatic system that made use of all the modern technology. And so for the community then, that is relatively isolated, it would integrate it and really give it a big boost. And so people coming, for example, to visit New Castleton, or some businesses that might well be internet-based, but would still need to be having physical contact, would be using the railway instead of using delivery trucks. And that is, in the end, quite efficient thing to do. In my experience, when I was there very young, aged 6 to 16, the information available about the outside world was minimal. I didn't really know anything about the value of education in secondary schools. I hadn't heard of universities. We didn't really know much about the big world. So for rural communities, the big benefit of being connected to the bigger world is that the people growing up there, the children, the teenagers, the people who are, let's say, young adults that are working there, they tap into a much bigger information flow and connectivity to the outside world. And that makes the social impact of infrastructure very valuable on the individual lives of people. People that are not connected together at the moment at all, both within the village and to neighbouring villages like to Hawick and Carlisle, will become part of a much bigger and more dynamic community. What is the consequence of little villages and towns like New Castleton and Hawick if the railway isn't opened? Obviously, there will be a benefit from improvements in internet connections. That would give them an internet connection. But you only have to look at the population dynamics, say from 1960 to 2020, that's 60 years. Over 60 years, Hawick has depopulated down from 20,000 probably to 14 or 15,000. New Castleton used to be 900, probably down to about 600 now. So I'm afraid that trend will continue. You'd have more depopulation. But if you then had the railway, you have many, many more possibilities. And you then have the imagination of the people living there who want to live there, opening up in parallel with other aspects of their lives. They'd be opening up other activities other than tourism. people don't want to drive around in their cars anymore because of congestion and pollution and so on. So it's much more efficient in terms of the environment and the impact on global warming and so on. So I think one of the big cases is to argue that there should be a strong railway system throughout the country that would then fit into the government's drive towards greener and more energy efficient communities. And so a reduction in global warming, and this is what they've promised to do actually. So I think it would fit in well in that sense.
Transport in London, and the Central Borders area was then
Hawick Station
at least 40 miles
now
from the
presents
nearest
a very
main
dismal
railway station.
scene, and the once familiar railway sounds.
It doesn't need to be futuristic, it doesn't need to be what's scientific, it doesn't need to be cutting edge. It's a railway that will transform lives forever.